Well, good to see you all today as we begin this trek through the book of Revelation. In the past couple of years, 2 years ago, we did the Old Testament in its entirety. And last year, we did church history in its entirety. And we took the whole year to do those classes because they were big subjects. And I had readings assigned, and I made sure I got through X number of years or X number of Bible books each week. We're going to be a little more open-ended with Revelation. It's shorter. It's only 22 chapters. It's not 2,000 years like church history is, or the entire Old Testament. So basically, my plan is we're going to do an introduction today. Looks like the introduction is going to bleed over into next week. Maybe take all of next week, we'll see. But next week or the week after, we'll start going through the book verse by verse and probably about one chapter a week. So roughly, next week, we'll talk about chapter 1, or maybe 2 weeks from now, chapter 2, chapter 3, roughly. But we'll leave it a little more open-ended. So there's not going to be a rigid time schedule. If we end up in the middle of chapter 3 at the end of, and have to pick up in the middle of chapter 3 the next week, fabulous. So we're going to be open-ended from that standpoint. But Revelation is a pretty daunting book culturally. And so I did want to take a good week and a half, 2 weeks even, we'll see, on an introduction and an overview. And to start with, I wanted to just solicit from you all, what are your positive views of Revelation, if any? Some of you have grown up in other faith traditions that emphasize Revelation so much you may be traumatized by it. We have a priest that's got an office, I won't say where, but it's just right across the street. She grew up in a very conservative church, and she doesn't like Revelation. She's got a post-traumatic stress disorder from Revelation. And there are people out there in our culture. There are certain faith groups that read it within certain narrow categories, and that can cause some problems. So I wanted to see what you all thought of Revelation, either positively or what are your negative views? Just throw something out if you have something.
Seems like somebody's on drugs, right?
Drugs, okay. Is that positive or negative? I guess
That's a negative.
negative, okay. Drugs, psychedelic, LSD visions, okay.
It's all about the end of the world.
End of the world. And, okay, what else?
About the future.
The future, okay. That could be good or bad, I guess.
Yeah.
Sure. Bob?
It seems to be instructional.
Instructional. Okay, so there's a message and a purpose, okay? Anything else? Yeah, good.
I was going to say, some years ago, I did a class on Revelation with my next door neighbor in Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing he did was point out the revelation of John written by God to Jesus Christ.
Right. That's
that's one of the biggest misunderstandings about this book.
so maybe it might not be just a drug-induced thing. Okay, that's God and Jesus Christ. Good. Okay, what else? Trey.
End of all bad things.
End of bad things. Okay. It's about the end, but it's also about the end of bad.
Right, the closing part where it says there will be no more tears.
Right. Chapter 21, 22. Oh, glorious good news. Yeah. No more tears, no more crying, no more death. All these things will pass. Yeah, Kathleen.
Well, I used to be about horror movie things, but then I realized or learned that a lot of it was symbolism. And some of the things they wrote about then, they couldn't have conceived of, but because of where we are today and technology and things like that, then some of those things could be, almost like modern weapons, or and also prophecy, from the Bible, things that we're really talking about the future, kind of where we are today.
Okay.
I can't think of the specific.
Okay, all right, that's great. Thank you.
My only experience was when I was in college, involved with Campus Crusade for Christ.
Uh-huh.
I was taught how to share the gospel, and Revelation 3 21 says, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock."
Knock.
And I memorized that verse.
Knock in Jesus, yeah.
Then I went to share the gospel with somebody and I said, Revelation 3:22, let's look that up. There was no verse 22.
Yeah, that's the end of
And I
the.
thought, is this Bible missing a verse? It was Revelation 3:22. It's
21, you jumped too far. It's funny. Trey.
I like the part in 5:13 where it says all created things will be up there praising God.
Okay. Okay, so there's some worship that happens in Revelation, a lot of worship. We'll talk about that. All things praising God. Okay, well, that's some good stuff to start with there. Gives us an intro here. I'm going to try to give you some handles on how to help interpret Revelation. And one of the major handles I would start with is Jesus's first words in the book. They're not, woe unto you. They're not, be afraid. They're not, this is a terrible vision. It's do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. And in fact, Jesus goes on and proclaims the good news. I was dead, I'm alive, and I have the keys of death and Hades, all the powers of darkness. I'm in control, and God's in control. So don't be afraid. And if we come at Revelation with a sense of fear, we're going to read it a certain way. If you come at anything with an interpretive lens of X, you're going to see it through that lens. If you are looking for death and gloom and destruction, well, you can find some. But if you're looking for good news, which is the ultimate purpose of this book, it's in there too. And I would say it is the overarching, overwhelming theme of Revelation. All right. So here's a statement. Revelation is an apocalypse, or it's an example of the apocalyptic genre. And then I say at the bottom there, that statement is both redundant and circular. Why? All right, let's go through that. So apocalypse, what comes to mind when you hear the word apocalypse or apocalyptic? Just
End of the time.
end of times. What else? Anything else?
Disaster.
Disaster. Yoshi.
The writings of Ezekiel, Daniel.
Okay, got some Old Testament writings like that. They're apocalyptic. Good. What else? Okay. Well, I put in Google Images apocalypse, and I got this. Nuclear destruction, meteors coming down from the sky, the X-Men villain, apocalypse, zombie apocalypse, destruction, destruction, destruction. Well, that's how we culturally view the word apocalypse, but that's not what the Bible word means at all. Apocalypse is actually the first word of the book of Revelation in New Testament Greek. Apocalypsis Jesu Christu, the apocalypsis Jesu Christu, the apocalypse of Jesus Christ. And there's a book here. This is called The Little Kittle. It's a book that has an article about every word in the New Testament and how they're used in the Greek culture before, how Socrates might have used it, if Socrates used it, or if Plato used it, how it was in the vernacular and what it meant in the New Testament. And this is the 1-volume abridgment. It's a 10-volume set. This is the short version for pastors. If you're a New Testament scholar, it's a 10-volume set that's about yay thick. But when you look it up, they list words under titles. They put the titles in little boxes. And when you look up apocalypse, this is the cluster you get of the words that are under this section. And it may be a little hard to see down at the bottom, but you've got calypto, kalmna, anacalypto, catacalypto, apocalypto, and apocalypsis. And look at what the meanings of those words are. It's all about, the root is all about covering or veiling. And to apocalypsis or to apocalypto means to take away. Apo is the prefix for taking away or removing. So it's removing coverings or removing veils. That's all the word means in Greek. Lifting of a veil, revealing something. All the things that we associate with apocalypse is stuff our culture has put on it because of this particular book in a lot of ways. Jimmy, we lowered the temperature just a degree or two. It's just a tad stuffy here. So apocalypse means an uncovering. And it's the first word of the book in Greek. The Latin version is revelatio, which is where we get revelation. But interestingly, the Latin Bible throws the Greek word in for the first word in this book. So they don't even use revelation in the Latin Bible. They use apocalypsis. So it is the first word. So the revelation, the uncovering, the unveiling, the apocalypse of Jesus Christ. So what the book is about is not doom and gloom and destruction, though there is some of that. Apocalypse is about letting you know what's really happening, removing any kind of veil or cover, letting you see behind the curtain. Wizard of Oz, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Apocalypse, pay close attention to what's behind the curtain that we're removing. What's behind the curtain, in Greek thought a lot of times, is the real thing. The book of Hebrews is all about that. You go behind the veil, you go up to heaven and see what's really going on. In this world, we have images, shadows, and things, but the real world is in heaven. And so you remove the veil, you remove the separation, you remove the covering, and you get to see what's really going on. So if you're in the Roman Empire, if you're a Christian, and these things are happening in your world, to remove the cover says, okay, but what's God's eye view of this? What's happening in heaven? What is God's purpose in the midst of all this? So it's not about scariness. It's not about nuclear war and destruction and meteors coming down and nasty comic book heroes. It's about telling you what God's perspective is. It's as simple as that. Now, of course, culturally, we have other layers of meaning, but that's originally what that means. And as somebody said, this is God's revelation. God, Jesus are revealing this. The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave. Why? To show us something, to show his servant something, to remove the veil. And God makes it known by sending his angel to John. And John testifies. So God unveils and sends a messenger with a message to write it down. And then that message is taken off for others to see. So to say revelation is an apocalypse is a redundant statement. The word is the same. Of course, it's an apocalypse. That's what the word means. I also say revelation is an example of the apocalyptic genre in that that's a circular statement in many ways. Why would that be? Well, it's circular because modern biblical scholars, when they started to look at apocalyptic writings as a separate genre, they started with Revelation. And then they said, well, there's some more. There's some chunks in the Old Testament that sound this way, Ezekiel, Daniel, that kind of thing. And so they started to define that based on Revelation. And they say, there's some Jewish writings that seem to be like this. Oh, there's some other Christian writings. And so the apocalypse is actually the kernel of apocalyptic writings, and the category got expanded over the years. And we didn't know of some of these books until we dug some of them up in the desert in the 1940s, and manuscripts are found elsewhere in monastery libraries and things. And so we have this expanding genre that expanded out. Revelation was the core of it, but we've had other writings that have been put into that genre with it. And so it is a little bit circular to say that Revelation is an example of the apocalyptic genre. It's the first book in the apocalyptic genre by which other books were defined. For example, in the Gospels, we've got a section that scholars in the 1800s started terming the little apocalypse. It appears in Mark 13, but there's also parallels in Matthew and Luke. This sounds like Revelation language. Jesus said, nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, earthquakes, famines. But after that suffering, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will be falling from heaven, the powers in heaven will be shaken. And they'll see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. And then the Son of Man will send out angels, gather his elect from the four corners of heaven, from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven. So Jesus in the Gospels uses some apocalyptic language, some apocalyptic imagery. Sounds very much like the book of Revelation. And so as scholars were looking at that, they've now classified, we talked about this 2 years ago with Old Testament prophets, that the Old Testament prophets, some sections of prophecy were proto-apocalyptic, and then in the Old Testament there's one chunk of one of the books that is full-blown apocalypse. So scholars usually say we got proto-apocalyptic writings, parts of Isaiah, parts of Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Joel, Zechariah, And then the second half of Daniel is an apocalypse full blown, just as much as Revelation is. But that ain't the only Jewish apocalypse. I put a list of some other Jewish apocalyptic writings. There are a bunch. The apocalypse of Abraham, of Moses, of Ezra, prayer of Joseph, fourth Ezra, which is in the Apocrypha, the apocalypse of Elijah, the book of Eldad and Medad. So lots of Jewish writings that are apocalyptic. Ditto for the New Testament. So there are some New Testament chunks that are apocalyptic. We talked about in the Gospels, these little apocalyptic sections, but also 2 Thessalonians, 1 Timothy, 2 Peter, Jude, a couple verses of Jude, and the book of Revelation. But I had to reduce the font here. There are a bunch of non-Bible Christian apocalyptic writings as well. The apocalypse of Samuel of Calamoon, whoever the heck that is, Stephen, the apocalypse of Thomas, Testament of Abraham. So lots of apocalyptic writings, the apocalypse of the Virgin. So there are lots of these writings in this genre. Scholars thought Revelation was it. No, we need to add Daniel, then we need to add some other things. But now we've got lots of examples of things that fit into this genre. So it's not just a one-off thing. Now, having said that, these are all chunks of these books. Even Daniel is only half apocalyptic. These are just chunks of these books. We only have one full-blown, complete, total apocalyptic writing in the Bible, and that is the book of Revelation. All the others are apocalyptic in sections. Revelation is the apocalypse from chapter 1 to chapter 22, full-blown all the way through. Questions, thoughts, comments so far? Yes, Rick.
If it just means revelation, that would be the whole Bible.
Well, yeah, in a way it is, but because Trey asked, thank you, Trey asked, isn't the whole Bible in some ways revealing or uncovering? It is revealing God's will in some ways, but this is a distinctive genre, and these Jewish writings are using this kind of style, and so in a way there's some specific characteristics of apocalyptic writing I'll go into a little bit later. So yes, in a way that's exactly right. They're all revealing God's will, but this is a specific genre that has some characteristics that are revealing God's will. Good question. Thank you for reminding me to repeat questions, Renee. Especially for those of you watching on YouTube later. So.
Jim,
Yes, Abby.
just said a minute ago, this book is God's perspective. God's perspective of what?
Okay, well we'll get to that.
Oh, okay.
What's the quick answer is what's going on in the world. Think about it. We look at the world, Aerosmith, there's something wrong with the world today. I don't know what it is. They were singing that song 2,000 years ago, just not those words and tune. What's going on? How could God possibly be involved with it? Well, God is involved. God is not only involved, God is in charge. The people that seem to be in charge, like Caesar, they're not in charge. God is ultimately in charge. So that's what's being revealed. You may think things are bad, and things are bad in your life for these early Christians, but God is in charge, and that's part of the good news of Revelation, trying to convince and show the Christians that God is in command, and that God's purpose, God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven, as the Lord's Prayer says. Well, how do we approach Revelation and apocalyptic genre? Where are some more handles? I said one handle was don't be afraid. I think that's a good one because we do get daunted by this, and there are those destructive messages. But I'm going to come at it from a couple different angles here. I want to start with an author, David Macaulay. You may know him in the 70s and 80s. He wrote these books. He's an architectural historian and does some archaeological stuff. And he would do these detailed black and white drawings in these books of how a cathedral was constructed, stone by stone, and how they raised it up. And then he did how they built castles, how they built a Roman city. Later, they turned into PBS animation, and they animated these drawings, and wonderful, wonderful series of stuff. He did a couple books on the way things work, and the sequel, The Way Things Work Now. He added flash drives because they didn't have flash drives when he first wrote the book. They were so popular, they even colorized them later. The books are now in color. His black and white drawings now have tint, so you can be a little more impressed. But having said that, one of my favorite books of his is obscure. It's called The Motel of Mysteries. And it's a comedy book. It's unlike his other books. He wrote it in 1979 after some of these other popular books he had done. That was the year King Tut was touring the United States. All the treasures of Tutankhamun were in Washington, New York, and all that. I remember being on junior high trip, and we didn't get to see it. The line was just snaking out of the Smithsonian where it was. But the satire is that in 4022, Howard Carson, which he's making fun of Howard Carter, the discoverer of King Tut's tomb, finds an ancient tomb complex, an ancient tomb in a temple complex dating back to 1985. So an archaeologist, 2,000 years in the future, is excavating. It's funny that it's 4022 also, because this is written in 79, but okay. And the temple complex has this sign out front, Motel Toot and Come On. Okay, so this magical temple complex. And as they dig into this temple, they find an outer burial chamber with a king's skeleton buried in this chamber. Well, it's a motel room. You can see TV and the bed and all that, but it's a temple, and the king's burial chamber is there. Then they go further in and they find the queen's burial chamber, and she's got this porcelain sarcophagus, and there's all these interesting items laying around on the floor, and the archaeologists try to reconstruct what all these items are for, and they figure they must be used for worship. And so they recreate how the ancients in the 20th century, 21st century use these 20th century, how they use these items for worship. And this is their reconstruction. Put the toilet seat around their head and sanitize for your protection. And toothbrushes hanging from your, okay. So it's a comedy book. But the point is, we're looking back 2,000 plus years to Jesus's time. We're looking back a lot further than that to King Tut's time. How do we make sense of a culture that's so far back and so different? And that's an important thing to always keep in mind with Scripture and with Revelation in particular. One Roman historian says his job is like looking through the keyholes in the Palace of Versailles and trying to see through these keyholes the entire room. Well, you can't see the entire room. You can get really good glimpses of parts of the room in good resolution, but you can't see everything. And that's one of the difficulties we always face with history from back then, with biblical work from back then. So, having said that, how might a future archaeologist understand the following 2,000 years from now? What if they dug up some pictures like this? A donkey and an elephant starting to have a race, or a donkey and an elephant having a boxing match. What the heck? Did we have gladiatorial animals? Well, we probably did, because we got a bull and a bear also running around fighting each other. What's all that stuff about? Who are these kooky people? I pulled a copy of the AJ from August 29th when I was starting to do this PowerPoint, and I just pulled some headlines out. Think of trying to make sense of these headlines 2,000 years from now. Ice Cube concert takes Lubbock on 90s hip hop trip. Why do you have an Ice Cube in concert? I mean, if you have a dictionary, what is that about? Hip hop, isn't that what bunnies do? Hippity hoppity? What is that? Firebrand picked to lead South Korea's liberals. Well, firebrand in the dictionary is a burning stick. How do you, and what's it? Skoria. Lubbock Meals on Wheels. Why would they put Meals on Wheels? Wouldn't they get away? Is that what the volunteers are for, to chase down the plates that are rolling down with the meals? Dolphins VP Jenkins. Did Dolphins have VPs? And they had names and die at 47. Wow. And Jets get past Giants after offense falters. Well, they had military jets back in the year 2022, but did they have Giants that fought against Jets? Wow. Okay. So we have no problem with these images. We can decode these just like that. But 2,000 years from now, they might be a little difficult. All right. The same applies to Revelation. Cultural images are often strange to outsiders, and as time makes them more difficult, but they're easily understood, for the most part, by members of that particular culture. And so when we see things like, flying locusts or horsemen with bows, that might seem strange to us, but those were images. Those were images that made some sense. 100 years before Revelation was written, 150 years, one of the Romans was talking about the three-headed beast. Caesar and Pompey and whoever the third guy in the triumvirate was. A three-headed beast that was taking over Rome. Well, now we have a seven-headed beast in the book of Revelation. Well, leaders, no problem. Okay. So it's not a mystery what Revelation is talking about so much. Now, there is some mysteriousness even for that culture, but it's not something they would sit there and go, man, this is a drug trip. I have no idea what this guy's talking about. It is something that would be understood. And so I'm going to talk in a minute about various interpretive schools of thought when you come to Revelation. But I follow the scholars that would say Revelation has strange symbols and images, but they would have been understandable, they would have been decodable to the original audience. And the original audience for Revelation is first century Greco-Roman Christians who have at least some exposure to the Old Testament. Because the images are Greco-Roman cultural images, and they are Christian images, and they are a number of Old Testament images. And so would every Roman understand it? Well, they get the Roman cultural, Greco-Roman cultural stuff, but if they weren't Christians, they might not understand every Christian symbol. If they didn't know something about the Old Testament, they might not get that. But somebody with all that background, Greco-Roman first century Christians with some exposure to the Old Testament, they should be able to get most of what Revelation is saying. So I am not of the school that says when Revelation was written, the people were sitting there, what kind of crud is this? This makes absolutely no sense. I guess we'll write it down, we'll put it in a time capsule, we'll try to send it forward in history. Maybe 2,000 years from now, there'll be some Christians come along and they can decode this, but we have no clue what any of this junk means. That's not my view of Revelation. Rather, the Christians kept this writing. They preserved it. They passed it down. They made copies of it and made sure it got preserved because they did understand the message, not because the message was so mysterious or crazy that they could not get a handle on it. All right. Questions or thoughts so far? Yeah, Mark.
The case that Revelation, like almost didn't make it into the Testament.
Revelation was the most, when they finally did, we talked about this in church history last year, when they finally made the list of these books are the New Testament, Revelation was the most controversial one. Hebrews was second most controversial. And so, yeah, it almost didn't make the cut. It was on the line. There are some that didn't make the cut, like Shepherd of Hermas and yes, Jimmy likes that book. But anyway, there's some that didn't make the cut, but Revelation eked its way over. And probably because even though it was a bizarre book, there was good news in it. And even though it did have all the strange images, there was still good news in it. And enough Christians recognize that even a few centuries after it was written to say, we're keeping it. This is God speaking to us through this book. Good question. All right. Well, I mentioned interpretive schools of thought. There are basically 5 schools of thought that are out there when it comes to Revelation. And you will see examples of this, especially number 2. In our part of the world, number 2 is very heavily present. So what are these? Quickly, the first one is preterist, exclusively preterist. In other words, everything in the book has taken place already. This book is set in the Roman Empire. So when they're talking about the beast, they're talking about the Roman emperors. When they're talking about Babylon, they're talking about the city of Rome. Everything has already taken place. Rome is now gone as an empire. And so it's all past. That's exclusively preterist. In our part of the world, the futurist school of thought is very present. Revelation hasn't happened yet. It's all talking about things that are coming right now or coming soon. Problem is that keeps rolling, and that causes problems for people with a futurist idea. I remember, Saddam Hussein when he was in power in the 80s and 90s. Oh, there's the Antichrist. Well, Saddam Hussein's been hung, and he's taken out of the picture now. Oh, maybe it's Vladimir Putin. But before that, it was we had Adolf Hitler, and we've had Napoleon, and we've had so the futurists would say, no, no, all this is coming. All this is coming. And that's very much a part of the culture out around us. That's the milieu we do swim in our part of the world. Okay, there is a historicist part, and we get some of that in the culture out here, especially when you're looking at Revelation chapter 2 and chapter 3. The Revelation describes and predicts all of Christian history in various stages, and much of it has happened. A few things have not happened yet. When we talk about the 7 letters, the 7 churches in chapter 2 and 3, there is a school of thought that says these are 7 stages of church history. I don't buy that, but we'll talk about why. You can make a case for that, especially with church number 7. It does sound a lot like our culture, but historicist. Idealist. We run into some of this in the Episcopal Church and other mainline churches. Revelation, nothing literal about it. It's all figurative. It's all spiritual. It's talking about the constant internal struggle between good and evil. All of us have to face the powers of darkness. All of us have difficulties. And so it's not meant to be taken literally. It applies to any manufacturer of dairy goods. It's not meant to be taken literally. It's all symbolic, totally symbolic. And then there's the kind of the eclectic group that's kind of preterist futurist that says, okay, Revelation, a lot of it has taken place in the past, and it had meaning for its audience in the past. But that doesn't mean that there aren't parallels for future ages. If Revelation is talking about Caesar being the Antichrist, that doesn't mean that there won't be other Antichrist-like leaders that arise later on. And just for pure disclosure here, I tend to lean to school number 5. Revelation did happen. It had meaning in its culture at its time. Most of it has been fulfilled already, but there are parallels for us in the future. And of course, the last 2 chapters haven't happened yet. God's kingdom has not come. God's will is not being done on earth as it is in heaven. And so while I see much of Revelation taking place in the past, and we have to look at Roman Empire history to understand Revelation, there are still parallels for us all the way through Christian history. There are parallels for people in 1000, in 1500, and certainly parallels for us in the 21st century. So that's so if you want a pure futurist view of Revelation, there are plenty of folks out there. Jimmy was at Mardell's looking at books on Revelation, and those dominated the shelves. It's hard to find much else unless you go on Amazon and look for some more mainline scholars that might be one of the other schools. But that's my bias, so you need to know that. All right. We do have time for this piece. I've got 109 slides for this intro. We're on slide 45, so we're definitely going to bleed into next week for this. Okay. This is the most technical piece I'm going to throw at you, but it's such a rich piece. I want to do it. This is seminary level stuff. So gird your loins. We'll get through it. Jesus says, don't be afraid. Jim says, don't be afraid of this. This is going to be good. This is going to be a very technical definition. We're going to parse it out. So Society of Biblical Literature, about almost 20 years ago, came up with this definition of what apocalypse or apocalyptic writings are. And don't be afraid, we're going to parse this out. Apocalypse is a genre of revelatory literature with a narrative framework in which revelation is mediated by an otherworldly being to a human recipient, disclosing a transcendent reality which is both temporal insofar as it envisages eschatological salvation, and spatial insofar as it involves another supernatural world. So I can just do a mic drop and we can walk away, right? Now let's go through this. There are a bunch of important pieces here in this definition. It's a wonderful definition, though it is complicated, written in academic ease, New Testament academic type writing. But okay, so apocalypse is a revelatory literature. It reveals something. It's got a narrative framework. Think of the biblical prophets. Is there a storyline in most of the prophets? Usually not. Occasionally you get something. Jeremiah says, okay, this happened on this day, and I was testifying to the king or whatever in this place, and this happened to me. Isaiah 6, in the year King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord. He was high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple, and I said, woe is me. Okay, so you get some pieces of story in the prophets, but oftentimes you're just getting oracular stuff. You're getting prophetic statements and not getting a narrative. In fact, you're getting something more like an LSD vision, Abby. Picture yourself in a boat on a river with tangerine trees and marmalade skies. Somebody calls you, answer quite slowly. Girl with kaleidoscope eyes, cellophane flowers, yellow and green, towering over your head. Look for the girl with the sun in her eyes, and she's gone. Lucy in the sky with diamonds, LSD. Now, John denied that was ever about LSD. He said that was a picture his son drew. The son, Julian, came up with Lucy in the sky with diamonds. And I don't know, it's awfully convenient. It's quite a while. There's not much narrative in that song. It's a lot of weird psychedelic images in that song. But Revelation is not that way. There is a storyline. Yes, there are all these weird images, but there is a story. Okay, I said prophets, not much narrative, rather various statements. But in Revelation, there is a narrative. I, John, was worshiping on Sunday. I was praying, and I heard this voice. And Jesus, I saw these lamps, and Jesus appeared to me. And Jesus told me to write these things to these church and send this off. Then I was taken up to heaven. I saw this lamb. Then I saw this scroll with 7 seals, and the lamb started opening these seals, and these things happened on. Okay, they may be weird images, but there's a storyline. It's not just separated, disembodied images. There is a narrative framework all the way through the book of Revelation, including a wonderful climax in 21-22. So Apocalypse has a narrative framework. It's not just a bunch of weird images. It's weird images in a structure with things happening one after the other. All right, second part of the definition, mediated by an otherworldly being. Apocalyptic writings have somebody coming to tell you the message. In Revelation, it's God talking occasionally, it's Jesus talking some. It's also an angel talking to John and saying, do these things. And so you have these heavenly beings, God, Jesus, angel, relaying things. So it's mediated, told, related by an otherworldly being. Some apocalypses have somebody come back from the dead. Have Elijah come back from the dead, or Abraham come back from the dead and tell you these things. But there's some otherworldly being who relates things. How would you know what's happening in heaven? Well, somebody, the line in John's gospel, how can you know what's happening in heaven? Well, the Son of Man descended from heaven and told you all that you know. Okay, mediated by an otherworldly being. All right, it discloses a transcendent reality. It's telling you something about the heavenly realm, not just this earthly world that we live in, but some other deeper spiritual, heavenly, elsewhere reality. That's an important part of apocalyptic writings. It is uncovering something going on behind the curtain. So it's transcendent, and it's transcendent in 2 ways. It's a transcendent world which is related temporally. It's telling you about things that happen in time. Again, there's a narrative and there is a timeline. So it is telling you things that are happening or that will be happening soon. There's a lot of will be happening soon in Revelation. They use that a lot. So it's temporal. It's in time, and it's also spatial. You get to see different areas. You see heaven. You see earth. You get different realities, things revealed to you of what's going on. Okay, so that's a pretty technical definition, but it's got a lot of good pieces there to it. A few scholars that were part of this symposium said, not far enough. We need to add a few things. And they had a vote on it and debated it, and they didn't get a 51% majority. But here's the Minority Report add-on. And I think this Minority Report also says some good things. It says an apocalypse is intended for a group in crisis with the purpose of exhortation and or consolation by means of divine authority. And I think that's important. These writings are written to a group that's having difficulties. In the case of Revelation, we will see later on, it's an early church, and they're being persecuted by the Roman Empire. Persecution wasn't their earliest reality. Well, Jesus did get killed, but that was a local functionary. That was a one-off thing. But persecution is cranking up. What do? You're losing fellow members of your church. They're being executed. What do? Well, Revelation is saying hang on. It's giving them some consolation, and it's giving them some exhortation. You need to hang in there. God is going to take care of things ultimately. Yes, you may die, but you will live eternally, paradoxically. So hang in there with God. Hang in there. So group in crisis, exhorting them and or consoling them. All right. So that's what I was just saying. Core part of Revelation, Christians undergoing persecution. God is still in charge. So all these things in this pretty technical definition, I think, are wonderful for us. Narrative framework, otherworldly being, transcendent reality, temporal and spatial, written to a group in crisis, exhorting and or consoling them. Thoughts about that? That is pretty technical. I promise I won't do anything else that technical.
So the explanation of temporal there is saying that it's salvation. Typically that means like at the time, I guess.
Right. I should have defined that earlier, Mark. Thank you. Eschatological salvation is salvation at the end of time. When Christ returns, salvation is happening. And so we're looking temporally at not only what's happening now up in heaven, but also seeing a little ways in the future when Christ returns, this will happen, and then this will happen. Evil will be defeated, and then the New Jerusalem will come. God's kingdom will come down to earth in all of its fullness. Earth and heaven will be joined. So, yes, eschatological from that standpoint, and temporal from that standpoint. Good question. Our philosophy guy back here. Okay. Let's do another couple of handles for Revelation here. I think we can get a couple more things in today. One of the things, remember, Jesus said, don't be afraid. The other thing to remember, Revelation overall is good news and supposed to be good news. We see Revelation and we see all the dark images and think, oh, it's a dark, dark book. The original audience did not see it that way. The message to them was, bad things are happening in the world, but God is revealing that these bad things are not permanent. These bad actors are not ultimately in charge. They will be taken care of. They'll be taken out. And that is good news. And so remember that. Remember that. And ironically, people often get fixated on the nasty stuff in Revelation, the tough images, and we forget that it's good news. But we don't do this in our culture with things that we have as our symbols. Think of the movie Star Wars. I don't know of anybody sane who would watch the movie Star Wars and think, oh, what a terrible, all that horrible violence. Those nasty rebel terrorists, they blew up that giant space station, killed tens of thousands of people. What a horrible, destructive, nasty, dark movie. No, the good guys win. The evil empire is defeated. The evil empire, Roman, is defeated. That's what Revelation's about. Yay, yay. Or the movie Ghost. Patrick Swayze is killed. The hitman is hired by some mysterious guy. Turns out to be one of his best friends. And at the end of the movie, Patrick Swayze's ghost is able to save his fiancée, Demi Moore. And the hitman gets killed. And all of a sudden, these demons, these black figures come out of the darkness and drag the soul of the guy kicking and screaming into some dark realm like hell. And then that happens to the guy that hired the hitman. And he's pulled down into the dark realm. And do we say, oh, the villains, oh, how sad for them. No, it's wow, yay, they got what they deserved. Yay, it's a happy movie from our standpoint. Revelation would have come off the same way to the early Christians. They would not have seen it as nastiness or destruction or bad. It would have been triumphant. Yay, yay, the good guys win. The bad guys are defeated. I think I have time for one last quick thing here. So when it comes to Revelation, remember the music. The comedian Steve Martin used to play the banjo, and he said you can never have a sad song on the banjo. It's too happy of an instrument. And I remember his stand-up, he would play on the banjo, oh, death and grief and sorrow and murder. Well, it just doesn't fit because the banjo is so happy. Revelation is the same way. Revelation is a banjo song. It's a happy, happy song. And our music from the book of Revelation, we have a ton of music that comes out of this book. Revelation is all about worship. John sees worship going on in heaven. We still use some of those songs that are from this book. And the theme of this music that we pull from this book is rejoicing. Think of this old one. Shall we gather at the river? Where bright angel feet of trial. Is this sad? Crystal Tiber flowing to the throne of God. Yes, we'll gather at the river. Gather with the saints at the river, flowing by the throne of God. Wow. Yay, happy us. And not only that, soon we'll reach that river. Soon our pilgrimage will cease and our happy hearts will quiver with the melody of peace forever. Yay, yay. It's not minor key, it's major happy key. Or this text from Revelation. Oh, when the saints go marching in, I'm marching in, I want to avoid that horrible violence. No, I want to be in that number when the saints go marching in. And look at the images in the other verses. When the sun refused to shine, when the stars fall from the sky, when the moon turns red as blood, which we view as negative things. But no, I want to be part of that. I want to be in that number when the saints go marching in. It's happy. It's happy. And think of a New Orleans jazz funeral. They often will play this song two ways. They'll play it slow and a little bit more somberly, going to the grave, and then they crank it up, and it's happy at the end. Da, 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 da. Upbeat and joyous. And that's what Revelation's about. Or, if you don't like these kind of songs, think of classical. Handel's Messiah, the text of the most triumphant piece of music in Western classical music, I would say, comes straight out of Revelation. Hallelujah, hallelujah, for the Lord God omnipotent reigneth. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. This is not sad. The kingdom of this world is become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. King of kings, Lord of lords. Yeah, yeah. This is not minor key. This is not sad or somber. And it's no accident that Handel also ends Messiah with another Revelation text. Worthy is the Lamb that was slain, and that's redeemed us to God by his blood to receive power and riches and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and blessing. Blessing and honor and glory and power be unto him. That sitteth on the throne and unto the Lamb. And then that's about 7,300 amens at the end of that. But okay, all right. So when it comes to Revelation, think of our movies, think of our music. It's a happy book. It's a happy book. Yes, there's some tough stuff within it, but it's not tough stuff. Yes, some Christians are being killed, but evil forces that are doing that to them are going to be taken out. God will ultimately be in charge, and they will be vindicated. They'll be raised. Yay, yay, yay. And the kingdom of the world is the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign the next 20 years? No, forever and ever. Okay, well, we got about two. We'll stop there because the next section I wanted to ask the who, what, when, where, why, and how questions. So that's actually most of the second chunk of this. So and we're at slide 73. So we may actually get into the text a little bit next week. But any questions in the next 2 minutes here?
I was thinking, I would guess when Hitler rose to power and took over, Christians were going, that's the Antichrist.
Yeah.
He's the one.
Yeah, yeah.
Or Stalin, or whoever.
And when I was a kid, Ronald Wilson Reagan, each of those names has 6 letters, Ronald and Wilson and Reagan, 6. So yeah, there have been a number of people identified as the Antichrist. And again, given my bias, I think it was Caesar Domitian. We'll talk about that next week, a new Caesar Nero. But just because that applied to one figure in the past who was Antichrist doesn't mean there aren't others that also fit the bill coming later on. But other thoughts here? Yeah, Jimmy.
Well, and also with the scary stuff, the scary stuff was already happening to a lot of Christians anyways. That was their reality, so it's not.
Right, the scary stuff is their reality, and so to see what's behind the curtain, that God is in charge, is not, oh man, this is tough stuff. This gives our suffering purpose. This gives the difficulties we're facing purpose and structure. It's part of God's plan, ultimately. Yay. It's consolation to a group in crisis and exhortation to hang in there, as the definition said. Good. Yeah, Mark.
So in that first verse of the book, Revelation, Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his servants things that must soon take place. So I'm just wondering what the
I think it did soon take place, for the most part. Again, the final consummation of evil being ultimately defeated in 19, 20, 21, 22. We're still waiting on that. But where's the Roman Empire? Okay, it wasn't defeated immediately, but we saw Rome go down. We talked about history last year. Rome went from a city of 1 million to a city of about 20,000. And there was no empire anymore. I would say that got fulfilled, not necessarily as the first audience of the Christians might have anticipated it, but it did happen. And Caesar Domitian is no longer in power. And the Caesars themselves, there are no Caesars anymore. There are no Kaisers or Czars either. They took their name from Caesars. So from that standpoint, I'm not sure everything that soon took place happened exactly as the original audience might have expected it to happen. They might have expected it in 2 years or 3 years or 3.5 years. There's a time and a half, it's 3.5 years. But I would say most of those things have been fulfilled in some way. And in the long past. As well as having application for every generation of Christians going forward. Because we still have those forces in our world. And I won't say who they are, because if you're on one side of the aisle, you might see this group. And, anyway, but we'll go there. Other questions here? All right. Well, we'll pick up next time with the who, what, when, where, why, and how questions, and then we probably will get into the text a little bit. So chapter 1, if you want to read ahead, we'll hopefully start that next Sunday. So thank you all. All righty.